Okay, councilors and audience, I'd ask you to take your seats, please, so we can begin this meeting. In the absence of President Jim Crocker, I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. And with that being said, I would ask Madam Clerk to take roll call, please.
Councilors Bender.
Here.
Cullum.
Here.
Dagwan.
Here.
Flores.
Here.
Rapgrassetti.
Present.
Hebert.
Present.
Levesque.
Here.
Neary.
Here.
Schnepp.
Here.
Steinhilber. Tinsley. Wallace.
Here.
Thank you. We have
a quorum.
We have
Thank
quorum.
you. And one announcement before we begin the meeting. In accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, I must inquire whether anyone is recording this meeting, and if so, please make your presence known. Okay. Not seeing anyone, I would ask all of us to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please, and also to remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is, excuse me, public comment. Is there anyone at tonight's meeting that would like to speak? Please sign in, announce your name, and you have 3 minutes, please.
Good evening, and thank you. I'm Eileen Elias, and I'm representing the Barnstable No Place for Hate program and its kickoff meeting scheduled for October 20 at the Cape Cod Community College within the Grossman Commons. I'm here this evening to request Town Council to review a draft proclamation in support of the program, No Place for Hate, and especially its kickoff meeting. I have copies with me, as well as a mission statement for the program. I would say to you that I've gotten support from members of the Town Council, and I thank them. Paula Schnapp, I hope I didn't murder your last name, and apologies. Paul Ebert, Deborah Dragon, and Lynn Point from the town. Most importantly, with that support and members of our steering group, one of the members, Nancy Thompson, has been very helpful, and some of you may already have copies of the draft proclamation. I look forward to seeing some of you, I hope, if not all, at the October 20 meeting. Having the town's support is pivotal. This is based on a 2006 No Place for Hate program that ended, and we're bringing it back, and it's badly needed. Thank you. I'm now going to give out copies.
Please give those to the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anyone else for public comment? Could you please sign in, announce your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay. My name is Bo Chu. I want to appreciate all the help that I've gotten. I got a housing voucher out of this, I think. So they're miracles. Now all I have to do is find an apartment that will rent to me for $1,016 a month. But that'll be easy, and I'm actually here asking if people would like to help out at all. So here's the song. We got 226. Okay. All I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air, with one enormous chair. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Lots of colamite and lots of heat. Next time I'm going to get the words printed out before I start singing. Someone's head resting on my knee, warm and da-da she can be, who takes good care of me. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely, 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 lovely. Wouldn't it be lovely? I want to thank Paula Schnepp and Deborah Dragon, who sat next to me at the Don McLean's wife's breakfast, and we had a good talk. 42 minutes I got. Since we're all watching television a lot, and television is run by commercials, I want to make a quick pitch for, pardon? Yeah, the same as me. Thank you. Five Below is, I guess it's a pitch for big boxers and Target, and you can get really good, inexpensive things that come all the way from China. Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? Not hearing any, we will close public comment and go to council response to public's comment. Paul, Councilor Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, President. Thank you. Eileen, I just want to say that I'm sure that we'll bring this under discussion, we'll review it, and we're thrilled to have this being restarted in our community. We certainly need it, as you said. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chu, we'll keep you in our thoughts and prayers to find a place. Just because we have a voucher, it's still very difficult to find a decent place to live. And I think your point, your tune is well taken. And there are many, many people in our country, unfortunately, who are singing the same tune. So thank you for your perseverance, okay? Thanks.
Any other council response? Not hearing any, we will close council response and go directly to the main item on tonight's agenda, Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan presentation. Dan Santos, Director of Department of Public Works, and his staff will be presenting accordingly to review what we all know is probably the biggest financial investment this town will be making in many, many years. Mr. Santos.
Good evening, Mr. Vice President, members of the council. Happy to be here tonight. Joined by Assistant Public Works Director Rob Steen and Town Engineer Griffin Bowden, who will assist in the presentation. And there's no way I can know everything, so I need their help on lots of the details. So I'll be turning to them rather frequently, I'm sure. So what the goal tonight is to go through the development and final product of the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, or CWMP, which you'll hear about and see frequently. this plan is a result of really a lot of effort over the last 4 years by a lot of people. And it's just the latest version of wastewater planning that's been ongoing here in Barnstable for decades, frankly. I just want to point out that it is a plan that's been developed, and it's effectively a snapshot in time. It's our best effort at trying to propose solutions for some pretty significant problems, environmental problems, public health problems in the town of Barnstable, and how to address them. But I think what's most important is that it is truly a living document. You hear that about a lot of things, but what's built in is flexibility and the ability to modify it as necessary. And I think, as Councilor Rapgrissetti mentioned last week about adaptive management, and that is really effectively being able to respond and be flexible and to address things as they come up, because we can't really see into the future, and because of that, we take our best shot now. And as Rob likes to remind us all, at least on my staff, that no plan survives first contact, and that this process of planning is what's most effective and most meaningful. And I think I would tend to agree with that. So with that introduction, we'll get right into the presentation. You can see here the agenda. I don't need to go through that. Basically, what I want to do is point out the people that have been involved in this from the start, because I think they deserve a lot of credit. This has been a lot of work, and by a lot of people who feel very strongly about the town of Barnstable. And the first effort, starting in 2015, was the development of the Water Resources Advisory Committee. And you can see here the members. I won't go through them all, but it included 8 citizens and 3 town councilors, and they met for 2 years to develop the bones and the foundation of the plan you see before you today. And that was chaired by Lindsay Council. And I want to thank all of those members for that effort. It really was an invaluable part of this process. So other members of the team, and there's a whole long list here. I'm not going to read them, but this is town employees that were involved in this directly and heavily, starting from the town manager right down to our interns. But there are several people that I want to point out in particular that really pulled this together for us and went above and beyond the call, particularly over the last several months, to get this pulled together in a professional way and looks as good as any product I've ever seen coming out of any consulting engineering firm. So you'll see down near the bottom there, Casey Scrima. She's now an engineering aide. She started as an intern with us a couple of years ago, and she's a young woman with a lot of promise. And she's going to school now, and she's going to get her engineering degree. And she just did a tremendous amount of work on this plan, literally day and night, to pull this together. And she's got a lot of promise, and I hope she stays with us. I'd also like to recognize Miroslav Jakobica, who is a brilliant designer who's recently come to us, probably within the last 6 months, and he has a tremendous amount of experience, and he's trained as an engineer, but he's working as a designer for us, and brings us tremendous capability. I'd like to thank him. I'd like to thank Griffin Bowden, our town engineer of the past few months, who also has been proven to be a tremendous town engineer and asset to this town. I think he has a tremendous future here. I'm probably embarrassing him, but the fact is, for most of this time when we were doing this plan, he was doing 3 jobs, literally filling 3 jobs and getting them all done admirably. And then finally, I'd like to thank, and I know he'd hate me to do this, is Assistant Director Rob Steen, who, with his experience and deft hand, really brought the team together as a team and guided them through this entire process. So I'd like to offer my personal thanks to all of them for that extra effort that's over and beyond in support of our entire town. So thank you all. other organizations that were involved in developing of the plan. Obviously, the Department of Environmental Protection. Oftentimes, they're reviewing things at the end and commenting. They, in fact, were involved in our meetings and as a member of our team and providing input. That saves a lot of trouble, because if you're going sideways to what they're looking for, you have to backtrack, and we obviously didn't want to do that. We have Barnstable Clean Water Coalition and the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, both nonprofit organizations that have been very helpful to us in doing aspects of this project that we might not be able to do ourselves, and using and leveraging their membership and their funds to do things to help this program along, and we appreciate that. And then finally, UMass Dartmouth School for Marine Science and Technology. They are the group that developed the total maximum daily loads for our water bodies, which is ultimately what we're trying to meet. And they've been a partner because they're the real foremost technical agency that's able to make sure that we can meet ultimately the goal that we're trying to meet. And Brian Howes, Dr. Brian Howes runs that operation up, and I've just finished our reviewing the modeling, so they've been an important team member. So as we approach the comprehensive wastewater management plan, which is basically the work with the RAC, and the work over the last 4 years was to develop our wastewater plan. The comprehensive wastewater management plan now formalizes that into the document, which was distributed to you last week, and that we're able to distribute to the regulatory agencies, distribute to other agencies to get input on and formalize and recognize the plan as is required, under the state law and the Department of Environmental Protection regulations. So some of the guiding concepts, and there are a number that we held, in the background as we process this whole thing. Obviously, addressing all categories of wastewater need, and there's all reasons why you need to address wastewater, from public health and safety to groundwater protection and drinking water supplies, and we'll talk about some of those things. But the primary focus from a regulatory perspective was on nutrients, and nitrogen in particular. And that's because federal law requires, under the Clean Water Act, that municipalities meet total maximum daily load numbers when they have been established and promulgated, and there have been those for almost the entirety of Barnstable. We have a draft for Barnstable Harbor, but so we have those regulations, and we're required to meet them by law. And if we don't, we'd be subject to enforcement. And under an enforcement situation, then we lose control of what the plan is and how to address it. And in a lawsuit situation, which the Conservation Law Foundation did sue the EPA because they felt that the Cape Cod region was not meeting the standards in the Clean Water Act. And so the whole 208 program through the Cape Cod Commission was the result of basically negotiating that and putting that lawsuit on hold while the Cape, with the guidance of the Cape Cod Commission, works through these issues town by town and provides reports to the court that we're meeting the needs of the Clean Water Act. And that will be ongoing, but so far, so good. So the plan is based and constructed on a watershed basis, and what that means is that it's watersheds that contribute the water through groundwater to the embayments and estuaries where the TMDLs have to be met. And those watersheds it's a topographical delineation, so it does not respect town boundaries. So in other words, watersheds cross town boundaries, so the town of Sandwich and the town of Mashpee and the town of Barnstable, for example, all contribute groundwater to the to Papaneset Cove, Papaneset Bay. And so we need to address that on a watershed basis, because if just one town does their job and the other two towns didn't, we wouldn't meet the total maximum daily load for Papaneset Bay. So that's why it's done on this watershed basis. We wanted to maximize the use of our existing infrastructure, in particular the wastewater, the water pollution control facility over at the intersection of Bursis Way and Route 28, which has been operating since the 1930s in the town of Barnstable, a tremendous asset in this town. The town, fortunately for us, 80 years ago, had the forethought to build this infrastructure and build it with enough space and enough opportunity to expand, so that even today and for 50 years into our future, that site and that plant can still address our wastewater needs. A real bonus for us. Many towns don't have that opportunity and that infrastructure in place. We wanted to explore regional solutions because there may be synergistic effects, opportunities, and that's shown to have come true. And that working with our neighbors, direct neighbors, abutting communities, and others, that we can take advantage of those relationships and things they're doing to our benefit and vice versa. We chose to phase the plan, as we've talked about in the past. 30 years total, 3 10-year phases. And the benefit of that is we can take advantage of non-traditional solutions and testing and an investment in those things that we're implementing in earlier phases. We may be able to reap the benefits from in later phases. That's this adaptive management. And then obviously phasing and over a long period of time, we can look at and optimize financing options, which was discussed in detail last week by Director Milne and will continue to be discussed over the next 12 months without a doubt. Continuing on our guiding concepts, our goal was to explore all types of solutions, and that includes both traditional solutions, which is sewers, so collection of wastewater, treatment at a treatment plant, and then disposal. Non-traditional solutions, so alternative septic systems, many of the things we've heard about using stormwater treatment, permeable reactive barriers, wetlands, shellfish, lots of opportunities there that we looked at in this planning. And then finally, there are things that you can do with management. For example, working with zoning regulations to control where development occurs and where wastewater may or may not be appropriate, and using zoning to address that. And another example is fertilizer management. There's a ordinance in the town of Barnstable relative to fertilizer management, and educational opportunities, just so people are aware of the impacts they have by the things they do on our environment, and that's an important aspect of any plan. We're building upon previous wastewater planning efforts. So if you look in the appendix, if you looked at the appendix, and the reason it came on a thumb drive was because it's expansive. But it puts together in one place all of the previous work, and we're building, we're building on that foundation that's been built over many decades, and many councils and many managers and many engineers. And it was all good work, and that's why this is a build upon. And then the Cape Cod Commission's 208 report, again, a very intensive and excellent report with lots of information that we didn't need to redo, so we value and took from that as well. As we've told you before, we utilize in-town staff to create our plan rather than hiring consultants. For many reasons, that's been a great benefit, primarily because it saved the town probably around $1 million in effort. But almost more important than that, it saved us time. There's no way that hiring out consultants would have gotten to this point, this plan at this point. It also provides for maximum flexibility. So as we work with the council and have worked with the leadership, and they say that, well, let's look at this, or let's look at that, we can react almost instantaneously. Within a day, the next day, we can run a model, run the tool. And so there's a lot of flexibility and opportunity in having this done in-house. And it's controlled by people who care about Barnstable. And that's an important aspect. And then we've also want to be able to and have leverage opportunities as they come up. 4 years ago, we weren't aware of Vineyard Wind or Joint Base Cape Cod. And these, in the case of Vineyard Wind, are likely to have a very major impact on our plan, in our sewering approach. And Joint Base Cape Cod, it's an opportunity, it's an alternative. There's no commitments made there, but we've positioned ourselves through that opportunity for things that may be in the future that may work out to our benefit. So it's important, again, to be able to adapt and be flexible, and our plan does that. And then finally, the plan follows what we called here as traditional CWMP structure. The Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan is a requirement of the Department of Environmental Protection regulations that towns have to do these plans. They used to be called facilities plans. And there's a very routine cookbook way to approach these. And as you can see here, you have to do a needs assessment. You know, what are the needs in town relative to wastewater, and identifying all those and putting that all together and evaluating alternatives to address those needs. And after evaluating those alternatives, putting that into the form of a plan that you then implement. And then there's finally, as part of that, environmental review by the environmental authorities to make sure that it's consistent with all current federal and state regulations. The organization of the plan, and one thing I wanted to mention in the beginning is, I know you all have seen the plan, you've seen a lot of what I'm talking about tonight, but it's important that now that it's been in the newspaper, we've released this, we probably have a lot of new viewers at home that are watching this, and that's why I'm stepping through this and really being thorough about what the plan is, rather than just getting to what I'm sure are your many questions, and you're anxious to get to those, which we will, and that's why this meeting has been focused on just this one issue, to have plenty of time to do that. So the organization of the plan, as you can see here, there are 8 sections, and they cover what I just mentioned as identifying the needs, evaluating the alternatives, formulating the plan, addressing implementation of that plan, including the financial aspects. That's in the plan. Tonight isn't for discussing that. Perhaps there's some time for that, but I'm not intending to go into that in any detail. That was addressed by Director Milne last week. And then finally, the appendices, which we spoke about a moment ago. So the first section, the needs assessment. So the last needs assessment the town did was in 2011. So as I mentioned, we built on previous work, and we took that because, frankly, those needs are all still there. We haven't really addressed the needs that were identified in that 2011 report. So, but there are additional needs that we've identified in what we've done. And that's where we've identified the changes, primarily through the work that was done with the RAC in-house with the work that we've done. So we wanted to identify the water use of each parcel in town. And what the water use does is it tells you how much wastewater is coming out of those parcels. And based on what we know about the constituents in wastewater, in particular nitrogen, we can calculate how much nitrogen we're putting into our environment and how much is getting into our estuaries and creating the problems that we're seeing there. So it also identified what the nitrogen removal requirements are in the needs assessment, and that's basically comparing the known TMDLs with the nitrogen we're generating, and that arithmetic effectively tells you how much you got to remove. We also looked at what are future flows and loads. So we want to look at, where's Barnstable going relative to build out, and how will that affect any future plans and nitrogen loading. So the way we approached this was by basically building in-house a computer model, which we're calling a GIS tool. But we basically built a computer model which looks at all of these different criteria, as you see here, with respect to Title V conditions. That's what sanitary conditions are, the Title V issues, things that's typically looking at, like soils and groundwater and lot density and setbacks and flood zones and things like that. We looked at water supply protection. As I'm sure you know, there are 5 water districts in the town of Barnstable, and we have water supply from groundwater exclusively in the town, and the zones of contribution, which is the ground area that contributes water to those wells, covers a good portion of this town. So that's a factor in keeping septic systems under control in those areas, as well as where we discharge wastewater from treatment plants. Surface waters, not only, as I mentioned, the coastal resources, but also freshwater resources. We looked at, there's 183 ponds in Barnstable. Many of them are impacted and undergoing various states of eutrophication. And so we did a pond study, and we got a handle on that. And then under convenience and aesthetic issues, when Title V constraints restrict putting septic systems in or groundwater depth, you end up with mounded septic systems. And when you have communities with lots of mounded septic systems, it's not very attractive. But there are other issues around that, the velocity zones from the FEMA flood mapping, excessive pumping, et cetera. And then working with our planning and development department, understanding what are our growth needs economically. And I know the council spends a lot of time thinking about smart growth and economic development, and that's wrapped into the plan. And you can see that was contributed by Elizabeth Jenkins. So this GIS tool or model takes all these criteria and layers them graphically. There's a layer for each one of these things. And by stacking these layers, and we can look through that, and what jumps out is the areas where many of these overlap, and these are our most significant areas of concern. So relative to nitrogen generation, and this is just some background, and these are the watersheds in Barnstable on the left, starting with Lewis Bay, Halls Creek, Centerville River, Three Bays, Rushy Marsh, which is in Katuitt, Papaneset Bay, and Barnstable Harbor. Our total wastewater generation in the town is 5.3 million gallons per day, and we're generating 393 kilograms per day of nitrogen. So when we put that wastewater generation into the SMAST model for TMDLs, this picture comes into view. And what this looks at is the watersheds in the town, and based on the nitrogen generation, what percent of nitrogen that's generated in these watersheds needs to be removed to meet the TMDLs. So all of the watersheds except for the one in orange, which is Halls Creek, which has actually, that means there's capacity in Halls Creek, that plus 57%. All of the others are negatives. In other words, in Three Bays, we need to remove a total of 60% of the existing nitrogen to meet our total maximum daily loads. Centerville River, 34%. Papaneset Bay, 64%. Barnstable Harbor, 65%. That's one portion. That's not the entire, excuse me. That's not the entire watershed, but there is a portion of Barnstable Harbor. And Lewis Bay, 23%. Now, these watersheds, just to back up for a second. So a watershed is the area of water that's contributing to the coastal resource projected onto the surface of the earth. So these aren't boundaries on the surface of the earth, but it's where groundwater moves. And it's groundwater that's taking the nutrients from septic systems and bringing them to these water bodies and estuaries. So that's just a little bit about what the watersheds are. And so, but we can't build our plan based on this gross look at the watershed. So we had to refine that. And when we did, this is just a table of reductions by sub-watershed. So we broke down those big watersheds, and what's on there is not necessarily relevant other than, I want to get to that. Did I have that graphic? Oh, there it is. So these are the sub-watersheds. And this is where we have to really take the action for addressing the nitrogen reduction problem. So what I'm trying to say is, if we didn't look at it from a sub-watershed basis, so take, for example, where it says 100% in one of those sub-watersheds there, and you only did, and you did 120%. Wow, that was great. But it doesn't, if you didn't do what's needed in the other sub-watershed, you're not going to meet the overall. So you have to look at it on a sub-watershed basis and meet it in that level. So we can talk about that more if that's confusing when I'm through. But in other words, we just had to get down to a great level of detail in order to meet these reductions. And this chart just shows the amount of kilograms per day reduction by sub-watershed. So we looked at future residential flows, and this says ultimate because this is based on ultimate build-out. So this is taking all the parcels in a watershed and applying the current zoning to those parcels. So what could occur? And it's a tremendous amount of additional flow. We have to do that as part of the analysis. What's the ultimate build-out? But the fact is, it's not realistic. So we try to evaluate that and say, well, reasonably, what's going to occur? Looking at history, what's happened, and the likelihood. You know, we're not going to put the maximum number of bedrooms on every lot, and we're not going to have the maximum number of amount of flow or heights of buildings on every lot. That just, it doesn't occur that way. But it is part of the analysis. But where we do have high ultimate flows at build out. Now, if you look up here on Lewis Bay, you see 371,000 gallons per day, or Barnstable Harbor, 332,000 gallons per day, and 3 bays. So where you see these higher numbers, we're addressing these because these are sewered areas in our plan. We're addressing the future flows through the infrastructure itself. So it's not that we have to put infrastructure there. We just have to make sure the pipes are big enough and the pumps are big enough to address that. So that's really the value of looking at this build out. If we had big numbers in areas that we weren't proposing for sewers, that then would be a problem. But that's what drove the plan to what it is today. And that was residential. This is commercial. And again, you can see in the Lewis Bay watershed, which is sewered, 1.4 million gallons per day, ultimate build-out flow. Don't ever expect to get there, but if some portion of that does get there, we are sewered, and we just have to address modifying the system as necessary to accommodate that. So at the end of that needs analysis, again, we were doing this in a graphical fashion through GIS, and we've showed this to you in the past. So this is our needs by type across the town. And as you can see, the predominant color is red, and that's where we have to address nitrogen removal in those watersheds. Yellow is economic development, areas where it's been identified that where growth is occurring or we'd like to see growth. Blue is ponds and wellhead protection. And then the other reasons are more like Title V reasons where we need to address putting sewers instead of having on-site septic systems. So that addresses the needs. So then we looked at evaluating the technology to meet the needs as we start thinking about building the plan. And we relied on the Cape Cod Commission 208 plan because they did a tremendous job in their Chapter 4 of looking at all of the technically feasible alternatives for dealing with on-site wastewater systems. And we looked at all these alternatives relative to a number of factors, including the efficacy of the solution and whether it would be successful, proximity to existing infrastructure, capital and O&M costs, how quickly it can impact the problem. An example there is if you were to put an alternative septic system in that's a mile up into the watershed, and stop that nitrogen or reduce it significantly, it's going to take a number of years for that to affect the water body. But if you were to do something at the water body or actually remove a septic system on the coast, that has a much more immediate effect. So that's the time relationship there. And whether or not the solution can address more than one need. In other words, are we addressing an area with high groundwater and has a nitrogen problem? And then finally, we met and have been continuing to meet with abutting neighbors. We met with Sandwich, Mashpee, Yarmouth on numerous occasions over the last several years to understand what their plans are, what things they're doing that we might benefit from, and what things we're doing they might benefit from. One of the results of that is in Yarmouth, they have a need for treating wastewater from the western part of their town. And it would make sense for us to treat it because we're very close. And we have a need ultimately for wastewater disposal. And it turns out they have areas that might work for wastewater disposal that they don't need. So there's an opportunity that we might be able to work together with them. Nothing firm yet. We have to get direction from you all and see if it makes sense. But the technical aspects of that have been looked at very closely, and we now need to move into the political and the financial aspects. Excuse me for a second. So we've talked about, on the last slide, looking at a number of types of solution, from traditional to non-traditional to management. And just as I mentioned, traditional, just to put it graphically, talking about collecting wastewater from homes and businesses, transporting that through a network of either gravity or pressurized pipe to a treatment plant. The one we have today is the one at the Water Pollution Control Facility. And then treating and disposal. Today, we're disposing of that on site. But in the future, we may be transporting that to another site because we need more capacity. And then finally, the disposal. And on non-traditional solutions, there's just a few here, and I mentioned them, but aquaculture has been a very well-studied option for removing nitrogen from the water body itself. And there's been a lot of good work on that. Dredging. The top left there is what's called a permeable reactive barrier, where we put a barrier, actually install into the ground, and groundwater flows through it and removes the nitrogen. So there's lots of opportunities there. The thing with the non-traditional solutions are, right now, DEP, who ultimately approves this plan, doesn't give you credit for them. So for us to rely on them, to put them in our plan and say, we're gonna meet the TMDLs by doing all these alternatives, DEP is gonna come back and say, that's great, but you have to give us a plan that is going to work, not might work. So I'll be talking about in a moment how we've addressed that. But that's an important aspect of the non-traditional solutions and why our current plan, particularly in the first phase, is sewer-centric. And then management solutions, as I mentioned, education, zoning, other regulations, particularly with respect to fertilizer in town. You know, fertilizer, while it's close to 10% of the problem, it's hard to regulate. And so education being really one of the best opportunities for that. So in developing the plan, and we've spent time updating you over the last several months about all these steps that we're going through, and I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see here all the steps that took place in really starting with the rack and starting with collecting everything that we had to date and kind of sifting through that and seeing where we stood, what data gaps existed that we needed to fill. For example, we went out and did a study on the ponds because we didn't feel like we had enough information there. So if you move down into this, we developed the plan. It's been distributed to you. What we mentioned last couple of weeks is the modeling effort at SMAS to prove out our plan. We didn't have the results of that, frankly, until yesterday. But that's a big aspect of this is, again, we want to submit a plan to regulatory agencies that works. And the modeling is what proves that out, and the modeling did prove that out. In fact, we got results that our plan will meet the TMDLs that are proposed in our coastal estuaries that exist based on the proposals that we've made. So that's great news. We didn't expect, frankly, it to be anything other than that, based on what we know about this, the internal work and the care that we took in doing this. But DEP needs to see that rubber stamp of, yep, this is a plan that's going to work. So that was a great piece of information we got. And then finally, working with Director Milne and putting together a financial strategy, which one has been proposed, and I'm sure we'll spend a lot more talk about that in the future. So after going through all that, this is the graphic representation of our plan, which we've had in place and we've been tweaking. But to go over it once again, this plan shows 3 phases of implementation, 10-year phases. There's going to be 5-year review periods. Every 5 years, there's going to be a formal review of how we're doing. Do we need to tweak the plan and do that as necessary? The red is phase 1, 0 to 10 years. The green is phase 2, 10 to 20 years. And the yellow is phase 3, and 20 to 30 years. The yellow, and this is where I'll get back to what I was speaking a few moments ago about the non-traditional solutions, we are investing in, as are our partners, and Barnstable Clean Water Coalition is taking a spearhead in this effort in working with the US EPA and the Nature Conservancy and putting together some investor financing to test out alternatives, in particular alternative septic systems and the use of returning bogs to wetlands that will treat nitrogen in the Marston's Mills River system. So that Marston's Mills River system, including the work that we're proposing to do in dredging the pond, is effectively one big experiment in non-traditional solutions, which we're hoping will bear fruit. And if it does, and if it reduces the amount of nitrogen that we think it will in that system, then we can eliminate a very significant portion of what you see there in yellow and not have to sewer those areas, which will result in a significant cost savings to the town and a much quicker addressing of the nitrogen problem in the 3 bays, because this all goes into the Marston's River system. And now when you've moved from groundwater into surface water flow, you've got a direct pipeline into North Bay. So that's why this makes a lot of sense and why we're hoping that works out and how we're using our non-traditional or alternative technologies. And what we're doing, which is unlike many other communities, is we're investing in these even though they're not proven out, because we have faith in some of them, and there's enough cost savings and improvement to the system that can come from these that it makes a lot of sense to do that. And then what you see in the purple there is stages of our very most western part of the plan. And there's 3 stages there. And that came about as we were working through the development of our plan for western alternatives that were coming about as a result of communication with our neighbors, both in Sandwich and Mashpee, and in the JBCC alternative as a possibility of getting to addressing that area, in particular concerns with Shoestring Bay, sooner than might otherwise have been done without those opportunities presenting themselves. So the results of that plan, as you can see here, phase 1, you can see the amount of wastewater captured, nitrogen load removed in kilograms per day, and how many parcels are affected. So ultimately, in our first 3 phases, we're proposing sewering of 9,870 parcels for a total of 1.7 million gallons per day of wastewater. And that will occur over 190 miles of both public and private roads. And then in the the stage solution for the most western and Katuitt area, you can see 145,000 gallons per day, 14 kilograms per day removed, with 890 parcels affected and 18 miles. So effluent disposal is an important aspect of our plan. Obviously, if we're going to be sewering and collecting wastewater and treating it, we need to dispose of it. Right now, we're currently permitted to dispose of 2.7 million gallons per day at the wastewater treatment facility that we currently have. Our treatment capacity there is 4.2 million gallons per day with our current plant. Looking at the phasing of our plan, we don't need more than the 2.7 million gallons per day for probably another 5+ years. So we don't need that answer today. And we didn't want to hold up our CWMP and are starting to implement our plan while we wait for more information, which is a cycle that a lot of communities get into. It's like you got to have all the information and make a decision. Well, that's a mistake, because every day that you're not treating and removing nitrogen is another day that nitrogen's going into our estuaries and coastal resources. So there are some things that need to be worked on. This is one of them. You have funded and appropriated funds for us to look at what is the capacity at our current facility, and to look at what are the alternatives for disposal other than that site, other locations, other types. So we're going to be looking at really a comprehensive view as to what might be available for disposal. So that includes leveraging opportunities that come up, like JBCC in Yarmouth, where there may be capacity. It includes looking at other sites in the town. It looks at possible ocean outfall discharges. It looks at irrigating with wastewater after it goes through the groundwater, pumping it out and using that as a nutrient source for irrigating. There's lots of ideas. It's possible that we could suggest putting wastewater disposal in certain areas of town where currently we're protecting for water supply. But maybe we can move those water supplies. Maybe we can purchase a water well. Maybe there's enough value in that to move a water supply well to a better location and use that. Because we need to balance both our wastewater and our water supply. They're both very important to the town. They go hand in hand, obviously. And so that's why we've begun working with the water purveyors on a monthly basis to start talking about this, because we all got to come to some agreement that we're all generating wastewater, we're all drinking water, we have needs, but we have to balance them and work not only in our small entities and water districts, but as an entire community. So we will be, as those studies conclude in the next several months, we'll be putting them into a format that we can present them to you and start having those discussions about what our final effluent disposal opportunities might be. And we look forward to those results and to discussing that with you. So from phase one, this is a graphic that shows the phase one projects. So we looked at entirety of phase one, and based on the type of work that's being done, how we get main trunk lines in, when we start going into neighborhoods, how that all makes sense, how much work you can do at one time, how much disruption to the community, how many contractors would be needed. Looking at all that, we've identified these are all separate projects. Now, it doesn't mean that one in one area might not be going on at the same time as another in another area. These are just how we've broken out the projects. This is our implementation plan. So we've labeled each of the projects that you saw on that previous slide. Tells you how many number of parcels are connected, the wastewater captured, the nitrogen removed, and how much of phase one that is. And phase one is 44% of our total nitrogen removal of the overall plan. And this is what you see here is the sequence of how that would be as well. Not only have we listed all these attributes of each one, but we would start with Merchants Way. Merchants Way is up in Independence Park, and that's part of the MassWorks grant we got, so that's going to get underway this fall. And then we need to move to Strawberry Hill Road and Route 28 because we're going to start putting in that pump station at the corner of Finney's Lane and getting piping into that area and starting to move our transmission system to the west along Route 28, or our backbone. So that's our implementation plan. So relative to environmental, we have to have DEP has to review our plan and put their stamp of approval. We have to submit to the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act office, the MEPA office, and we file an EIR with them. And we have to file with the Cape Cod Commission to make sure that our plan is consistent with the 208 plan that they submitted to the EPA under that CLF lawsuit. And that work will be ongoing in the next several months. The environmental, our environmental plan, as I mentioned, when we passed the plan out, that's being undertaken right now. That part we have subcontracted out to an expert on doing these, and that Wright Pierce is working on that. And they really couldn't do the environmental aspects and looking at the environmental impact without having the plan first. So we couldn't do that on a parallel. So they've taken our plan now, and in the next month, they're going to write that report. Now, what that looks at is all of the environmental resources from groundwater to coastal waters, and so you can think, well, why would we be looking at that? We're trying to improve that. Well, yeah, that's true. So we're looking at both pluses and minuses, and typically on these, this is a positive. It's unlikely they're going to come back and say, well, you sewered too much. I mean, that's just, so they're going to look at air quality, they look at noise, they look at traffic. And so what are we doing as part of this project, and how are we mitigating those things? So that'll come forth. I anticipate that they will provide that within the next month, and I don't anticipate having any real problems. It's just something we have to do as part of the process. We are, in fact, attempting to improve the environment here, unlike many other projects which have a negative impact on the environment. That's really what those laws are for, is to make sure that we're protecting our environment. But we have to go through the process. Financing plan is part of our plan. I'm not going to get in any detail. I just wanted to show you that the financing plan is in our CWMP, and Director Milne did a fantastic job in presenting that last week, and I just have a slide or two on that. And he broke down, as you can see here, what the total costs that add up to $1.062 billion, and what portions of the project that contribute to that: collection and conveyance, the lion's share at $640 million, treatment system costs at $224 million, financing $168 million, and project management at $30 million. The financial timeline as part of the plan is projects commencing in fiscal year 20 and going out to fiscal year 2050. Bond financing commencing in fiscal year 20 as well. First loan issued in FY 2050 with payback commencing in 2050. I'm sorry, last loan is in 2050 with payback commencing in 2051. And then our last loan payment in 2070. Again, as part of the CWMP, DEP wants to see that not only do you have a technical plan, but you got a way to pay for it. If you send them a plan that's not viable from a financial aspect, they're going to send it back. So we have a very detailed plan, much more so than most other communities submit. We've really put a lot of thought into this. Now, it's certainly subject to your review, and I'm sure we'll undergo some changes, but there's good bones of a financial plan there, as good as I've ever seen in one of these plans. And then finally, the full program funding sources, as was presented last week. There are many, and there needs to be many, to start talking about financing a program that's over $1 billion, and that includes the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, sewer assessments, the local room and meals tax, utility charges, investment earnings, system development charges, and a general fund contribution as part of that proposal. We haven't included any grants, which hopefully would be forthcoming, but it makes smart sense to be conservative and not to count your chickens before they hatch. So and this is just a summary funding of what that total is in the breakdown. You've seen this last week, but I just wanted to make sure that you saw that it went hand in hand with our CWMP, and it is part of what's submitted as part of our plan. So finally, what are some future issues that the town council will have to wrestle with and look at? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, effluent disposal, obviously a big one, and that's going to involve, I'm sure, some policy decisions relative to land use and water supply. Handling private roads. A lot of the plan puts sewers in private roads, and we need to think about whether or not we need easements. Are we going to pave those roads? Are we going to leave them in the condition they are? Are we going to improve them? Are we going to take those roads once they're improved? I think these are all things that need to be considered as part of this plan. How is the governance of the sewer system ultimately going to be? Are we going to address it like continuing what we do now, or is there going to be some other form of government because of the size and scope of both financially and technically of this plan? Sewer use ordinance needs to be updated, and we talked about system development charges as a potential funding source. If that's the case, we need to address that through sewer ordinances. And then future intermunicipal agreements that deal with shared technology, watershed permits. One of the things DEP is looking for is permitting wastewater plants based on a watershed basis. So Pleasant Bay, with the towns around Pleasant Bay, Harwich and Chatham and Orleans, have a watershed permit, the first one in the state, where they've been, as I talked about earlier, where watersheds are meeting our total maximum daily loads. They're actually permitting systems on that basis. So we'll be exploring that with our neighbors. And then finally, if we're conveying our wastewater through other towns, that needs to be something that gets wrestled with, or other towns conveying wastewater through our town. These are things that the council would have to address. Sandwich, for example, actually their town meeting voted to give Barnstable permission to use their roads for the conveyance of wastewater. They've already done that. And that concludes the presentation. And we're here. I know the manager's here. Mark Milton's here. I think the whole team is available for discussion and your questions. And we'll be happy to try to answer them and participate in a robust discussion. Thank you.
First and foremost, thank you, Dan, for that presentation. And I would be remiss if I also didn't echo your initial comments in thanking the entire team for a job well done. This has been an ongoing process for a number of years. I know firsthand, having been one of the liaisons to the Water Resources Advisory Committee, and then this past year as part of leadership, there have been hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours spent on putting this plan together that ultimately results in the document that we as town councilors have here this evening for discussion purposes. And as part of that, the comprehensive financial plan that our Director of Finance, Mark Milton, put together that was presented at the last town council meeting are all reasons for us to applaud the staff and the team that we have available to us. Very professionally done, saved us hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in terms of, excuse me, in terms of going outside. So with that, on behalf of the council, we say thank you.
Thank you.
So with that being said, I know the town councilors have a number of different questions. I think to have this sort of orderly, if you will, I'm going to start on my left and just alternate back left and right. Every council will have the opportunity to ask questions, and then collectively at the end, if anybody wants to come back for a second round, we'll do the same thing. I want to make sure that everything is aired appropriately so that everybody goes home this evening thoroughly understanding, excuse me, I have a cough, what needs to be done. So with that being said.
Mr. Vice President, if I may just add
Yes.
one thing I did neglect to say, and I want to, because I know people are watching, that part of the plan is socializing it in the community, and we have set up 4 public meetings over the next several months in a variety of locations, from Barnstable Village to Marston's Mills, here in the hearing room. There's 4 meetings in total. You can go on the website and get that information about where and when those are going to be, so we can present the plan to the public and to get their input and thoughts before we finalize it with the council and before our final submission to DEP.
Thank you. And those meetings will be listed on the town website?
Yes, they
I'm
are.
sure that, I see Jeff Splain here, Cape Cod Times will probably publish where they are and where the locations are. Thank you, Jeff, in anticipation. So with that being said, I'm going to start to my left, Councilor Dagwan, if you have some questions, and then I'll move to my right to Councilor Tinsley, and then back and forth.
Yes, you mentioned that you're going to be starting with Merchant's Way. That's going to be sort of the first project. And you said you'd be moving to Strawberry Hill and then moving west towards, westward towards 128. And so I wanted to know what financial advice or help that you need from us. What policies or anything that we need to, as a council, help to move this project along financially and policy-wise?
Well, actually, on these first few projects, they're already funded either through grants or through actions and appropriations that you've made. So we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of financing in place to get underway. So right now, we don't need anything
No
specific,
finances.
but we will in the future.
No policies? What would you think would be your
Those
next
will, nothing right in the immediate need, but in the future, as I mentioned, the things we'll need to work on, that will be coming up within the next several years.
And
But
when would you be starting?
Well, we're going to put out to bid the contract for the Merchant's Way this, probably next month.
Anyway, thank you.
Councilor Tinsley? Pass. Councilor Neary?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm going to pass. I'm going to use the 2 ears and 1 mouth and listen and learn. Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Hebert?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to really support what Councilor Dagwan just expressed, because we are thrilled with the team. We're thrilled with the management. We're thrilled with our legal department. We're thrilled with our financial department. So you're the people who live, breathe this every single day, and you're the experts. So at best, we might have a comment, but what is our job to do? What is it that we can do that's going to facilitate? For instance, we had a good discussion the other day about Stewart's Creek, and I'd call it kind of low-hanging fruit, but a high percentage of the folks at Stewart's Creek still have not connected to the system. Am I correct in saying that? Okay.
Yes, that's
so,
correct.
And apparently they've got the best golden deal right now. Apparently it's like $7,500 to connect to the system. And I think they're already paying the fee, even though they haven't connected, in terms of operation annual cost. So those are the kinds of things I would like for you to bring to us to say, this is what we need. We need some muscle to say to the Board of Health and the DPW to work together to say, we need 100% connection at Stewart's Creek, because for the citizens to complain that we haven't maybe gotten the golden results that we're looking for, well, whose fault is it? If the citizens haven't used the materials we provided for them. So I think it's for us to look at and to be told and explain, hey, it would really be a big help if, I believe, let's say with the fertilizer, it's protected by state and federal law that, it's kind of exempt from us. We can't ban it.
Well, that's pesticides. I don't know about fertilizer,
Fertilizers.
but
Okay, so if legal tells us, well, there's no prohibition to banning fertilizer, you know, I don't want to sit here and complain that it's costing us so much to take care of this nitrogen when we, as a community, are contributing 10% to the problem. So I think we got to toughen up, and if there's areas that we can work with the state that helps us to make improvements, it's not all on you. You're the engineers. You're the one, we call down engineering, we say, we have a problem, fix it. So what I want to know is what you want from us, how do we use our muscle and our time best to make a difference as we move forward. But I think Councilor Dagwan was right on the
Yeah,
money.
I think working with the manager, we will bring those things forth as appropriate and as needed. You mentioned specifically the Stewart's Creek in connection there. We are looking specifically at that issue for the remainder of this plan to make sure that doesn't occur, and to make sure that we put strict timelines for connection in the plan, and that they're only waived under extraordinary and extreme situations. And I can't speak for why it is the way it is for Stewart's Creek, because that was not handled by our department, but I know we're aware of the issue, and we're talking about solutions that we're going to propose so that doesn't happen.
Right, and so, again,
Including working on the Stewart's Creek as well.
Right,
I know Manager Ells has been working very closely with the Health Division on that.
yeah, and there are some other failed systems. So again, because we have a great finance director, we have to look at where we can get money, and then how we can help the citizen and the resident to help themselves to clean up their waterway. If you talked about the permeable reactive barriers, I know they're using it in Eastham at the National Center, and it's been, so far, looks like it's working very, very well. So again, if your team found an area and you said, let's try the permeable reactive barrier in this area, because we've got a concentration of houses that we know are contributing to this water body, whether the pond, estuary, whatever it is, then let's do some experimenting and let's put that permeable barrier in there and see how that affects. So we get to the point that we say, we're starting to see and we're starting to smell the difference that our actions are taking as quickly as we possibly can. And then we could end up saving a lot of money in the process if we're successful. But in any event, it gets us going at a faster rate. But again, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Biedenbender?
Thank you, Vice President. Am I allowed to only ask one question at a time? Do I have a limit on?
There is a Patriots game tonight, but I didn't say that.
Well, I just want to make one observation. You were mentioning the public, I wanted to make one observation about, you had mentioned the public education campaigns, and there's going to be 4 public meetings, and that's great, but we're going to have to do a lot more than that. And I think in many ways, we're going to have to go where the people go and where they congregate. So I think, like in libraries, having an information booth, when there are big festivals in the town where we have our citizens going, we're just going to have to get out there in the public, because especially for young families, we have a lot of young families who can't deal with, who don't have babysitters, can't make an evening meeting. You've got seniors who don't want to drive when it's dark. So I think we have a lot of, we have to look at a variety of ways that we're going to educate our public and think creatively as to how do we get in front of as many people as possible, so that we basically have a shared vision of our community going forward between us, our town employees, and our constituents. All right, so am I asking one question at a time?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. So this was brought up by you talking about the effluent and conveyance through other towns, and that Sandwich had already given us permission. So just curious, when that happens, obviously roads are getting dug up again, right? How is that getting paid for? Is that a shared bill, or are we paying for what we dig up? How does that work?
Well, it remains to be seen, but if it's to our benefit exclusively, then we would be responsible for paying that. If we were putting in a shared system, then we would work out the relative contribution for those that are participating. Mm-hmm. I would expect that that's how that would go, but there's no agreement in place yet on that.
Okay. Going to shared watersheds, so it makes it a little bit more complicated, because now it means that the other communities with whom we're partnering, there's an expectation that they are going to do all that they need to do to have this combined solution to this problem. So one thing that pops out to me immediately is I know Mashpee, for example, has been really struggling to get to a point of agreement and a way forward. So what happens where in a situation where we're trying to move forward, but other towns are struggling with their plans, and yet we have certain TMDL requirements that we have to meet? How does that work?
Well, there's two things that address that. And for the example of Papaneset Bay, we have an intermunicipal agreement we've entered into with the three participants for that watershed, and that's Barnstable, Sandwich, and Mashpee. And through that agreement, that lays out what our responsibilities are and how we're going to go about meeting those responsibilities. So having those agreements in place go a long way towards making sure that each town is being responsible and doing what they've agreed to do. And then finally, I guess DEP would step in if a town, despite an intermunicipal agreement, was refusing to do its part. DEP would come in and has the power of enforcement. And that's the other reason they want to have the watershed permits, so that they can hold the individual town responsible when there are more than one town involved in a particular watershed. So those things are being thought about. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you. This is actually a financial question. The revolving fund, who is going to serve as the bank, the town or a outside entity?
I'm going to have to punt. Talk about the
Mark,
Patriots.
Mark is rising from the back.
Where is he?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Council. Mark Mellon, Director of Finance. Yeah, one of the ideas that we were contemplating would be to create a revolving loan fund to help homeowners pay for some of the costs, like connection costs. This is similar to the revolving loan fund that the county currently runs for the septic replacement program. They've actually reached out to us and offered assistance perhaps in trying to tag on to that program, our connection, a similar program for our connection costs, or we could seek special legislation and we could manage the program. But it would need a capital infusion, obviously, to get started. You'd have to have some money to loan.
Right.
So that was the idea behind that, and we can explore that further, what the options are.
Okay, don't go away. I have a couple more financial questions. We hope to have our CWMP approved by next spring, and when we get that, we can then be eligible for SRF 0% financing, correct?
We're currently eligible for SRF funding.
Okay. Okay. Then our plan indicates the receipt of 0% and housing choice funds at 1.5%. Are we allowed to use both for the same project?
Well, we are, some of our projects, we're going to submit our projects to the SRF for funding. And if they meet nutrient reduction, if it's a nutrient reduction type project, it could be eligible for a 0% loan. If it's not, it could be eligible for a 1.5% loan because we're a housing choice community.
Okay. That's it for finance, for now. Yes, I do. Going back to you, Dan. So this is predicated on municipal bonds of approximately over a 30-year period, and this means we're designing, bidding, and constructing approximately $30 million in infrastructure every year. My question to you is, do we have the capacity to do this with the other workload that our town has?
Well, we will. We have been building our team, and we will continue to build our team based on the implementation plan that I showed you. So.
Okay, great. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, two last questions. One's about the Halls Creek watershed. You mentioned that there is no need for nitrogen removal because it has an assimilative capacity. Can you explain what that means?
What that means is that each water body can take on a certain amount of nitrogen before it starts being affected by too much nutrients, which starts that eutrophication process, which kills off the eelgrass, which is the nursery for finfish and shellfish, and lowers the oxygen, dissolved oxygen. So there is room in that water body that Halls Creek discharges to add more nitrogen without getting to that point where you're starting to eutrophy that water body.
Okay. This goes to one of the alternative treatments that's in the plan, alternative technologies, and that's alternative toilets. One of the challenges that was mentioned in the draft plan was that there can be a significant cost to homeowners because you have to replumb and what have you. But there's also a significant cost to homeowners for sewering. And just so this is a two-part question. One, what's the differential between alternative toilets, the cost of that, versus sewering, if we're going with that roughly $18,000 estimate? And then, is there a potential way to maybe pilot in an area to see if it's worth it, if it has the desired benefit? Because similar to the Marston's Mills area with our alternative technologies, is that if you see that that takes hold and it's doing the job it needs to do, then you don't have to put in the sewering infrastructure that you originally planned, which is a great reduction in cost and so on and so forth. More quickly reduces nitrogen. And I'm just wondering if alternative toilets actually have any potential benefit here, or it's too new and there isn't enough data behind it.
Well, the data that exists where they've been attempted, and particularly in Falmouth, it's been very unsuccessful. People are not desiring to do this, even though significant amount of the costs would be provided. There's just a social aspect of alternative toilets, urine diverting toilets, using these things. So the history is not good with them. But I think more importantly, a lot of these areas, we need to remove the nitrogen, not just reduce it. And a lot of the alternatives just reduce the nitrogen. And where you've got to remove 100% of what's there now and anything in the future, they're just not going to be effective. So that's why we haven't really relied on those kind of technologies in a broad way. I think there are other technologies, which, as we are working on, as I mentioned, that do have much more promise and are more viable, I think, in our situation.
Okay, thanks. I think that's all I got for now.
Thank you, Councilor Bean-Bender. To my right, Councilor Schnepp.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you to the team. This is an impressive document, and I haven't even begun to put the USB port in a computer, so I can't even imagine what else is to review. I'd like to look at a little bit more of the detail on some of the phasing and stages that you've put out in the plan. So phase 1 is a 10-year plan, and do you have, I don't know if you have that map, that colorful map that we have? Yes, thank you.
This is the phase 1.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Phase 1. So is there any way to sort of put in chronological order all those different colors, or is that going to depend on variables that are
That's
yet
right
to be
here.
determined?
Right.
Do you want to take it? Yeah. So at this point in time, if we go back one, please. So at this point in time, what we've done is we've delineated what the different projects are that would be within phase 1. And we are currently still talking about how the best way to execute those are, and there's going to be a number of things that are going to play into that. One will be sort of the policy decisions that we're going to discuss that need to be made here, and particularly what was made last meeting where I was talking about some of the financial and fiscal policy discussions that have to happen. 2 will be sort of opportunities. So for instance, the old Strawberry Hill project, which is that, I don't know what you call it, WAV one to the far right there, that came to the forefront because Vineyard Wind came to the forefront. So that could potentially change things. I guess what I would caution is that list that's the next slide is not necessarily a chronological order of that. We are still working through that. I think our desire is, for a number of reasons, particularly how the plant is set up currently and what we can currently accommodate at the plant before we have to make changes to the plant, is to try to get the backbones in as quickly as we can, which will be the old Strawberry Hill project and get down 28 as far as we can get, as quickly as we can get. Then fill into the neighborhoods as we go through and go by. There will also be a discussion about sort of public tolerance for construction to some extent. You know, we can talk about here the fiscal issues, we can talk about the engineering issues, we can talk about those other things. There will also be just sort of, at some point in time, everyone will say, stop. It's just a lot of construction. Every time I turn a corner, I'm running into construction, and we want to think smartly about how we do those stages and how we do those projects in a way that we try to not over-pressurize, if that may be a word, one neighborhood versus another, and we really think that stuff through. So my only caution to that next slide is that please don't read that as purely it's a checklist chronological order. Good thinking is going to happen in each one of them. You will have a say, frankly, in all that because it all comes to you as a CIP project, at which point in time it can be debated whether this is appropriate at this time or not for that project. That will have a portion of that. So I would just caution preemptively saying this is exactly how it's going to go, because I wouldn't say that's the case. Sorry.
In terms of how DEP or whomever else is reviewing this, do they, as long as they know that this is in the phase one, they don't have as much concern? Again, as you mentioned, there are some policy considerations. Obviously, the ability to do some additional economic development, whether it's housing, is going to be predicated on the fact of when these sewers get in. And so some of these decisions we may want to move up in terms of, and I appreciate the consideration of the road, because I mean, we're dealing with another intersection that's being torn up, and you know, it does seem continuous. In terms of trying to understand how the phases and the stages work together, I know you haven't put any sort of dates and times on that, and I guess that's because, but is there any way to get a sense of what timing we're looking at, all the kind of Katuitt-related projects?
So the reason why we did that is because as the stages came about, we didn't want people to confuse them with the phases. Basically what we were saying with the stages is that Katuitt will be executed in 3 different chunks. Now, whether those chunks happen in 0 to 10 years or 10 to 20 years will depend on other things. So for instance, if JBCC becomes the Western solution, for instance, and if we know we're probably not going to be available to get to JBCC for 10 years, then stage 1 of that may not even start to year 10. So even though it's the first stage, it may not start to the second phase. Thus, it was causing confusion in our office when we were talking about it. So we had to separate the language on the two of it, and I understand it's caused some confusion since, and I apologize. But they really were trying to divorce the time scales from each. The stages could be on a very different time scale than the phases. Still be completed in 30 years, but relative to the other phases would not. Does that make sense? Or need me to keep going?
In terms of the financing, I don't know where the overlap is going to be, and how much are we going to be front-ending, you know, some of these projects versus pushing them off? I mean, is the timing of the stages going to be dependent of how accelerated we are in phase 1? And
so the timing of the stages will probably be more dependent upon technically when we have those opportunities for disposal of those stages. There'll come a decision point at some point in time, and it's not this year, where are we going to JBCC or are we not? Are we trying to pick up a Western solution or are we not? Or are we bringing it back east or are we not? Those 3 wickets we're going to have to get through and understand. Once we understand those things, then we can start to bring them into the mix in terms of how they're going to fall out and stuff. But until we truly understand which one of those 3 avenues, those macro avenues we're going to go, or something else that we're not envisioning at this moment pops onto the radar screen, which has happened at least twice with Vineyard Wind and JBCC, then we'll be able to start to go ahead and say, okay, now we're going to slot those in and know how they're going to come in. And again, they're going to come to you like all the others as CIP projects through that process so that you'll have a chance to see them and understand them and deal with them one at a time.
so a lot of the area of Marston's Mills and the whole kind of western part of the town is contemplated in phase 3. And I appreciate the thought that, if we are successful in some of these alternative technologies and other projects, that we can maybe not have the need for that sewering. But I'm looking at it from the point of view of, it looks like there's some significant TMDLs that have to be removed. I mean, we're talking 100% in some of these areas. I'm a little concerned if we're waiting 30 years out, we have a 208 compliance. I mean, do we run into any issues there?
That's why if you look at that, there's all those those are phase 1 projects in that 3 bays area.
Right. Okay.
To address the need that estuary has for reducing nitrogen in the short
So it'll take care
term.
of some of that issue?
Yes.
Okay, and then the balance would, okay. I think I have 2 more. You mentioned, the velocity zones are a consideration, and it looks like the Long Pond is probably the one velocity zone area. Now, my limited knowledge, velocity zone is, what areas could flood in the water table?
Long Beach, so,
What's that? Long Beach?
correct, yeah,
Sorry.
Long Beach, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where coastal flooding from storm surge and whatnot would inundate systems, and so we want to not have infrastructure in velocity zones.
Given what we had on the north side, don't we have some issues there that we might be having some velocity zone type issues on the north side that aren't actually contemplated for sewering?
It is sewer, that area is sewered.
That is?
Yes.
Okay. With the possibility of climate change, with climate change, I mean, are those velocity zones going to increase? Are we going to have some, is that a variable that we may have to be looking at this plan? That's some flexibility?
Yep, certainly. Yeah.
Okay.
And climate change changing groundwater elevations. And so there's lots of potential impacts in the future that we have to be thoughtful of as we move the projects forward or where we site things.
So I think this is the last one for this round. This plan takes in consideration, as you said, our water quality and contaminants of emergency concern, also the health of our ponds. I know that the APCC report was just released, and a couple of our ponds were deemed unacceptable. And I haven't had a chance to read that report, so I don't know all the details there. But I know that Mystic Lake is an area that in 30 years is not considered to be sewered. Is there any consideration for any water quality issues that might be coming from other sources that either sewering or our plan wouldn't address?
So when we went through and looked, and at that point, APCC's report wasn't out, and we just obviously got it as well, so we have to look at that. But then that also speaks to, as we said at the beginning of this is a snapshot in time. This plan is going to evolve and change as we learn more information and as more information comes to the table. At the time that was coming through, and at the time that we were doing this, that wasn't the main consideration at that point. Doesn't mean it's not going to be, and it doesn't mean it shouldn't be. And as we learn more, it will potentially, or may potentially, adapt to accommodate that.
Thank you, Councilor Schnapp. Councilor Cullum?
Congratulations on this plan. It is a tome. And it just is remarkable how much talent we have in this town. So thank you very much for all your hard work, from finance to the engineers at DPW to the leadership. It's amazing when you look at what other communities aren't doing, and you look at what Barnstable is doing. In my community, in my little precinct, we are sewered, and I would ask, I guess, based upon the response of people, what was both sides of the creek, and one side of the creek had a good experience, the other side of the creek didn't have a good experience, with everything from the contractor to the plan to the disposition of information to everything. And I don't know that we want to poke a sleeping bear and ask some of the people to come forward and tell us what their particular gripes are so we can avoid it and plan for it in the future. But I remember I was running for town council after the sewer had been put in on those side streets, and there were a lot of really angry people there that felt like they didn't get their $7,500 worth, blah, blah, blah. So, and I mean, I went right in front of my store, and I saw a lot of what they were complaining about, and they were right. And things that were, in a day's work didn't seem like much. Like, on one side of the store, they stopped traffic. On the other side of the store, they stopped traffic. But it's noon, and I had a deli. So my delivery girl couldn't deliver. Like, it was terrible. And quite frankly, it was a major financial hardship. So I just hope we can mitigate that a little bit by planning better this time. Also, there's some, just in my travels today in Chatham, they're digging everything up and sewering down there. And I was speaking to one of my accounts that I work with down there, and they're having to redo a lot of the work that they've already done, dig it up and redo it based upon just, faulty workmanship, pipes too close together. Intake too close to the exhaust, as my father would say. So I just think that when we're launching such a huge effort and there's so much work done on the back end, that the delivery has to be almost perfect. Otherwise, all the talent seems to go the way of the dodo and a pile of criticism, and I would hate to see that happen. So again, I'm gonna ask for a contact team, an ombudsman, somebody to help people figure out the benefits, figure out the ways they can find money, figure out the county program, figure out the RLF program, all the other things to make it happen. Because I think in order for this to happen effectively, it has to be perceived as a win by the people who are paying for it. And I feel that whenever I went to a meeting the other night, a civic association meeting the other night, and it's amazing to me the reality of sitting up here and dealing with professionals versus the perception when you go to a civic association meeting of what's being covered up, what's not being divulged. I mean, it's just, and all of us, I think, know that how hard you work and how talented you are, and I just think there's something really lost in translation there. And when we're asking the taxpayer to foot a bill of $1 billion, there's just no room for messing that up. So I agree with what Councillor Biedenbender said about, going where people are. Go to the senior center. Those people are going to be impacted by this. Help them find funding. Or maybe not you, but the town should put their first foot forward, their best foot forward, rather, and make that happen. With regard to the Stewart's Creek folks that are not hooked up, I'm hoping that maybe we can revisit that in some of our policy discussions up here, because the model that we have before us is dependent upon everyone hooking up, the way I read it and heard about it the other night. So I would definitely entertain a policy change that would compel people to hook up and pay not only the betterment, which they are already paying, but the connection fee, whether or not they connect, because that's important. But I know that they do have to pay they need to connect in order for us to collect the charges. I think that's really it, because we're Seward in my hood. But thank you very much for all your hard work. It's really astounding the amount of work that you guys can do. Thank you.
So
Thank
just
you,
in
Council.
response to the things that have happened in the past, we are learning our lessons from those. I've heard loud and clear from the folks from Stewart's Creek since I've been here. I mean, it's quieted down a little, but I certainly recall those concerns, and I've heard from Manager Ells and others. And we take to heart all of those things, including with our road projects. Every one we do, we learn a little more about what the best way to approach it is. So we're not going to make the same mistake twice. That's certainly our goal. And communicating constantly with not only you, but the residents is important and vital, and we're seeing the successes of that with the people we've put on the ground now on our road projects and how they're approaching it. So the feedback I'm getting is much more positive than when we started on some of these even a year ago. So we're learning as we go, and our goal is to to have it be as good in the implementation as it is in the plan.
If I may just one follow-up on that. I guess one of the things that was the most frustrating to the folks on C Street that were in the ancillary streets that were being sewered to the main that goes down C was a lack of supervision by the town on the contractor. So I would suggest that was one of the biggest gripes, and the insane stuff that happened, with shoddy work. So I mean, and then things are filled in, and then it's paved, and then, oh well, right? And then who pays the bill when something goes wrong? And that's, so just, I would ask for a little more supervision on the part of the town, because if we trust you to put this together, then we'll trust you if your eyes are on what's happening in our neighborhoods. But I think that the public really needs to be comfortable with that. And that would be me learning from year one as a town councilor that long ago. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Cullum. Councilor Rappacetti.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Dan, and your team. Absolutely. 30 years. My fingers are crossed that I'm going to be here in 30 years. I'm so happy that it's 30 years and not 60 years, because definitely I wouldn't be there in 60 years. So I'm appreciative of that. And just harking back on Councilor Schnepp's comment about APCC, I was disheartened by that report, but at the same time, happy to learn that our drinking water is good. So that's good to hear. So we're protecting that. And to Councilor Cullum's point about the people that are paying for it should see a win. Well, I think before I became, or as I was running to become a counselor, I think one of the things that I said that I was really adamant about was this issue. But more importantly, this plan talks about 9,800 parcels in the town. Yet we have, I think, 29,000 parcels in the town. 25 of them are residential, and the other 5, I think, are commercial. So what struck me about this plan, and this was Mark Milne's page 2 of his finances, was, and I quote, total estimated construction costs are $863 million. And that's an average of $87,953 per parcel, 9,800 parcels. If we were to, and we talk about nitrogen loading and sharing with other municipalities, I think this plan needs to be shared in cost with the entire town, every parcel, not just those that are hooked up, but every parcel. And I know this is going to be a policy decision amongst the council, but and if we were to share with everybody, we're bringing that cost right from the get-go down to $30,000. So I think in order to implement this fairly, it has to be done throughout the entire town. I don't think where I live is going to be sewered, but I'm willing to pay for this, just like I'm willing to contribute to the education of the school children. So I'm really adamant about that, and I think it's hard. You think it was hard at Stewart's Creek, and that was subsidized by a pretty substantial grant. This is a mouthful that a lot of people won't be able to handle. But I think if we do it equitably, and in the future, because we're talking about economic development, we're talking about changing zoning. I'm fearful that we might go from 2 acres to 1 acre. Okay, bringing in more families. Looking ahead at the potential, it could be greater than 29,000 parcels. It could be 40. So I think we need to put something in place that everybody is going to be participating and paying for this. So that, and that's not a question, it's just something I'm very strong about, feel very strongly about. And I know that's a policy decision. The other thing too is, and it's been mentioned about having, good communication. I think it was the council president at the last meeting said that perhaps it's the council that should oversee the implementation of this plan. Well, I'm prepared to make decisions, financial decisions and appropriations But I feel that this is beyond the scope of us sitting up here, and it might behoove us to look into creating an elected sewer commission to handle and help implement this plan, which is formidable, but it's doable, and I think you'll be successful in this at the state level, getting approval of it. I don't know what that makeup would be, but maybe a representative from each village. But I think it would go a long way in having the community participate in this plan, which we all have to be vested in for the sake of our children and grandchildren, and maybe us when we're in our, in the 90s or 100s, who knows what happens. So I will, looking back, I know this has been on the books for a lot of years, and I think actually I was reading the 3 case studies of towns sharing coastal watersheds reports. That was published in November of 2008 when our town manager, Mr. Ells, was sitting in your position, Dan, as director of DPW. And so a lot of efforts have gone into this with Mashpee, Sandwich, and I know we're going to be talking about in a future item on a new IMA with those towns for the 3 bays. We have one for Papaneset, but not 3 bays. So this will be the first time IMA where we will be the fiscal agent on that agreement. So I'm hopeful that your plan will pan out as far as some options on the western part of the town, but also encouraged that the time has been contracted. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rappacetti. Councilor Wallace?
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. With respect to Phase 1, and the mitigation will take place through non-traditional and traditional methods. After the 10 years of that process happening, is there any chance that we might be able to expect that Phase 2, the mitigation may be less because of the porosity and permeability of the soil that surrounds Phase 1? And that the cost may actually be reduced because of the work we've done in Phase 1?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I think
Mostly, I think that nitrogen actually runs downhill, and that's the problem. We were looking at the pinch point there at Prince Cove from the Mills Pond down the Marston's Mills River to Prince Cove and into North Bay. After we alleviate that, and everything is still moving in that direction, would we find that there may be less nitrogen in the soil in Phase 2 than we see right now?
Well, the Phase 1 are those that are closer to the water body. So you're still having all that impact from the Phase 2, which are further away, that's still going to be moving towards that water body. So you don't get an extra treatment because you've dealt with Phase 1. You still need to remove it all from both of those phases.
Mm-hmm. So after we've sewered and mitigated through non-traditional methods, whether it's shellfish or the permeable barriers, the work we need to do in Phase 2 will still be exactly as it is. We're seeing it now.
Yes, Phase 3 is really where what's optional relative to the non-traditional solutions. It's possible, though, that we could have
tremendous success with some of these non-traditionals, and we implement them more than we have anticipated. So it's hard to know, but we're going to monitor that pretty extensively and apply them as necessary. But the plan has really been built so that phase 1 and phase 2 really need to be addressed through traditional sewer methods.
Right. Thank you. The other one note that I'd like to make, as most of us know, everything in West Barnstable is pretty much unicorns and rainbows. We don't have the nitrogen loading and the problems that they have on the south side. And we're all on private wells and largely Title V septic systems. We have to pay for those up there. We're paying for our own water. We're paying for our own septic. This notion that we have to spread the cost of this out to the entire town is doubling the cost of the water of the people in West Barnstable, because we're already paying for it. So I think that notion is irresponsible for this body to take. Anyway, that's just a statement I wanted to make, and it's not a question. But I thank you for your answer to my question. I appreciate it, and the great job you guys do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Wallace. Councilor Levesque?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and kudos. I mean, all the work that goes into this plan, and honestly, the immediacy, the attitude of immediacy towards the plan and getting it done and working together as a team. I can't say watching that. I admire everyone who's involved, and the communication and entering. Again, I'm sure I'm going to speak for all the councilors. Our questions, because most of the time when we walk in the room, I've said this before, we are sometimes the least educated and the least informed, because we're not, and that's our job to get informed, and you're very gracious to help us along in that way. That all being said, I represent Marston's Mills, and we're a little bit more rural, and we're kind of out there a little bit. And as you can, has been mentioned before, as far as Mystic Lake and Middle Pond, I happen to live in between the two of them. They're not going to be sewered, obviously, at this point. Obviously, that could change. And also, most of my precinct is going to be in the Phase 3 part of the plan. My question was, my first question, I should say, is obviously there's been talk in the past about the wastewater treatment facility over there at Barnstable United Elementary School, and that's the area, for those who might be looking at the map, that's gray over there to the left of where it says Centerville River. And that being, I know at one point that was maybe looked at as a contributing factor as far as connecting the, just wondering if maybe that was put aside for whatever reason, because obviously right now that's surrounded by Phase 3 area. So just for my constituents' purposes and obviously my own, why was that put in Phase 3 and not maybe utilized in Phase 1?
So to confirm what you assumed, the treatment plant there, the plan is to convert that to a pump station and bring all that back this way. It was put into later phases for a number of different reasons, not least of which is going to take almost all of Phase 1 to get out there to get to it. So there's sort of a time series that has to happen to get down 28. Whether it be for that property or whether it be for the other school that wants to be, the old abandoned school that wants to be developed, or for whatever other properties, we have to take some time to get there. So there's just the reality of that. The other part to that is all of that's what contributes down through the Marston's Mills River. And so to be able to preserve the opportunity to really get leverage or bang for the buck from those non-traditionals, which is what that river gets contributions from, we wanted to hold that out as long as possible for the fact that if those non-traditionals prove effective, we may not have to do as much in that Phase 3 area as otherwise. And it's directly connected to the area where the non-traditionals are. It's not like we're saying, hey, non-traditionals are working over here, give us credit over there. This is all the same watershed and all the same water body. If we take that watershed on too quickly, we lose the opportunity to really leverage those non-traditionals and what they could potentially do for us. So that's why that was put there in that time frame.
Gotcha. Thank you. It's a great answer to my question. And as far as the non-traditional methods, I think just to mention that the importance of that isn't necessarily of trying to curb the cost of the putting the pipes in the ground, but it's also to take care of what's already in the ground. And I think that I'd be very supportive of getting more and that out earlier, because again, if it takes 30 years to get some of those pipes in the ground, what do we do about the 30 years of wastewater that's going to be in the ground between now and then that's still going to hit that watershed? So, you know, again, fully supportive of that, and that's, you know, dredging a Mill Pond. The first thing I ever read in the record as a town council a couple years ago, and, you know, moving that forward. And obviously the continued partnership with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, and just with the mentioning of that, and I know we're in the process of doing questions, but I just thought, because you mentioned the cranberry bogs, that there's going to be a discussion by the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition at Cape Cod Beer about cranberry bogs in general, and specifically, I should say. And here I have I just wanted to pull up the email. The topic will be cranberry bogs, and it's going to be Alex Hackman from the Restoration Ecology for the Massachusetts Division of Ecology Restoration, and Leo Kakunis, who's a local cranberry farmer and owner of Cape Farm Supply and Cranberry Company, as the speakers. And again, that's at Cape Cod Beer at 6:30 this coming Wednesday. And yeah, I appreciate all the hard work that you guys are putting forth, your team, and yeah, thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Levesque. Dan, I have a question relative to Precinct 1. On that original map that showed the red zones, there's one zone that appears to be on the Comaquid-Yarmouth-Port line that showed a 65% nitrogen loading. It was in that original map. Could you tell us what is causing that and where specifically that is located?
It's, I believe it's to the east of Finney's Lane. Correct. Yeah, it's just high density. It's high density of septic systems that are contributing more nitrogen in that one sub-watershed than it can assimilate.
And it is septic system driven, I
Yes.
assume, because Millway obviously is sewered
Correct.
in that part of
Yep.
town. Okay, thank you. With that being said, obviously, my fellow councilors have had a number of issues and concerns that they've raised. I've just been taking a couple of simple notes, but before I ask if there are any other questions, there seems to be a strong focus on issues around public relations, making sure that we communicate with the folks, not only neighborhood by neighborhood, but the entire town, coupled with, obviously, quality oversight to make sure that the overall quality of the program, that the overall quality of the project that's being done is being done correctly. Whether it's a clerk of the works, whether it's a sewer commission, whether it's an ombudsman, I mean, I think you're hearing us loud and clear from a policy perspective. And all of these are policies that will be decided somewhere down the road. And subsequent, whether it's a shared cost, whether it's an individual cost, those are all issues that this council and future councils obviously will have to deal with. So with that being said, whether it's budgetary, you know, who pays and how much, those are things that we'll have to debate and discuss in the future and come to closure so that there is a sense of equity, if you will, and a sense of parity in some respects. And with all that being said, those seem to be some of the themes that I'm hearing. So those are areas that we as the council will probably be taking another look at down the road. So you should probably be ready to think about that. And I don't know if Mark Milner's still with us, but you know, obviously at the end of the day, most people say, what's it going to cost me? I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what people are concerned about. So we need to be in a position that we can give them a concrete answer. So just thoughts before I ask if there are any final questions from any of my fellow councilors relative to this presentation. Perhaps someone who didn't ask, Councilor Neary or Councilor Tinsley, or not hearing them. Councilor Biedenbender.
Not a question. I just want to say thank you very much for all of the thousands of hours you have put into this and the many thousands more that you will be putting into this. And also just to echo what Councillor Cullum said, that one of the incredible benefits that we have is we have such a talented team, and that we don't have to outsource a lot of the work that we have to do, which equates to millions, which means less money that taxpayers have to pay. So thank you very much for your time, your talent, and your efforts, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Beanman. Councilor Dagwan, I saw you with your hand. You have a question? She's done.
Just to follow up, this was a great presentation. It is very complex, and I think that's an issue for a lot of our citizens. Myself, being on the council, people seem to think that, we know everything, and we don't, particularly when it comes to some of the complex things that you're talking about here. I do know about nitrogen loading and that sort of thing, but there are terms that you mention from time to time that I don't understand, and I think that we have to keep in mind that the public doesn't understand them either. One of the ones, and I'll have you explain it in a few minutes, I'll just mention it. It's called ocean outfall discharging. I don't know what that means, but you can explain that to me in a few minutes. But I think that we do need to find a better way, and as Vice President has said, and many others have said, that we need to find a better way to communicate to our public. We know you mentioned that there is a phase 1 that's coming up. You're beginning to start, on one of these projects. And have we thought about how we're going to do just that? How are we going to reach the people in which this Merchants Way project is going to affect them? And is there something that we as a council can do to help? Because we keep talking about it, that's something that needs to be addressed. So just, I think that to hear what it is we're going to do. We keep saying, well, it needs to be done. I think it's good to come up with some solutions. If it's, putting flyers in everybody's area, putting up signs that say, this is coming up, the people that travel that way or go through there, I think we do need to find a better way to try to communicate to people about the projects that are going on. And I have tried a lot of the non-traditional solutions. I've looked at compost toilets. We've looked at, my husband and I have looked at, the recycling, the ones that filter and recycle water. And as you said, they're not very successful in that sense. But I'm wondering if there's any new research or anything that's looking at neutralizing nitrogen opposed to just reducing it and or eliminating it. So I think to continue to look at research in this area is important. So, we can kind of see things down the line. I probably won't be around, as many others said, when some of these projects are completed. But I do believe in our future. I do believe in a lot of the science that's out there right now. We have our astronauts who find a way to dispose of their wastewater. And so looking into that type of technology, I think we'll see more and more of that in the future, and we should continue to just keep an eye open in the future for that kind of thing. Okay, ocean outfall discharging.
So just simply put, that's where we would discharge the treated effluent into the ocean through a pipe. If you recall, they did this up in Boston with the Boston Harbor outfall probably 20 years ago. Went through years of permitting, and there's a major discharge out into miles out into Cape Cod Bay. And that's so, because there's much more capacity there to, we talk about attenuation of the nitrogen in the groundwater or in ponds, but these are very limited compared to the vastness of the ocean, and where the amount of nitrogen, say, in an effluent is negligible. I mean, probably not even measurable in the context of a large water body like the ocean or one of the sounds or Cape Cod Bay. So that's what that
So you run a
means.
pipe all the way out, is that how it's done?
Yes, you would, yes.
Miles out?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Just a comment, in terms of, I've been chatting with Councilor Cullum, and when you look at all of these alternative kinds of programs, as wonderful and as beautiful as the human body is, and we've evolved to a certain point. Unfortunately, we haven't reached the point where we do our own self-internal composting. Maybe some point that might occur, but until then, these are issues. I know I'm weird. But it's true. At some point, we're going to have to figure this out. And obviously, this plan is going to help us get there. So thank you. With that, Jed?
Anyway, it was my idea, the self-composting thing. I always thought it would be great to have a self-composting dog, especially this time of year when the leaves are falling and you can't, you're like, is that a leaf or anyway. Okay, but he's weird. I just wanted to say one other thing I wanted to say that I think is super important is the easements, taking easements across people's property. I was speaking with someone that would be affected in the Lake Waquaket area, who owns 2 parcels of land, and it's a particular concern to him that, he may want to build and he doesn't want it dug up or what, he just they need to know ahead of time what the scoop is. So I just wanted to mention that was also in my conversations with constituents, not mine, but others, it came up as something super important to communicate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Neri?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Rod, this is probably for you. Just a point of clarification. We've got stage 1, 2, and 3. I get that. But then you've got the staging. I'm sorry, phase 1, 2, and 3 and staging. Can you just kind of elaborate on that? Does this occur concurrently with other stages, or is this a
So
different project?
the reason why we did that is because it was causing confusion within the office that people were trying to tie the 3 potential Katuitt projects to the timing of the phases, and they're not related. The phases are 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30.
Yep.
The projects that are shown for Katuitt that we're calling stages, and we renamed them to stages for this reason, are on a different timeline, a different time scale, really predicated on what that western solution, if it comes to be a western solution, or the decision to pipe east, when that happens. That's when they can start. So their start period will be different potentially than phase 1. So it became very confusing when we started calling them anything other than what they're now called, because they're unrelated to each other from a time perspective, other than the fact that we hope to have both done in 30 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so once the solution of either effluent disposal or Joint Base Cape Cod or going out, whatever, once that's determined, then that will determine the rollout, for lack of a better word, of the stage.
Right, and just for a little history there, originally we initially thought that we would deal with the sort of Papaneset Bay area with an IMA and pay for projects in Mashpee to deal with that issue. And that would have been regulatorily fine. The problem that came up, and we started hearing it when we started talking to constituents about the plan 2 years ago, was Shoestring Bay is impacted, and it really didn't do much to help Shoestring Bay. So when Western solutions started coming to the table with JBCC potentially or others, where it became more viable to actually be able to do a traditional solution out there to deal with some of those problems and potentially affect Shoestring Bay positively as well, that's when that came onto the table. And look, the real decision points are not going to be, does the Western solution materialize? What is it? Which one is it? Or is there a decision to bring everything back east? And at that point in time, then we can get going on when that would actually be executed.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions from the councilors? Councilor Schnapp?
Thank you, Mr. President. It seems of great concern to all of us, as it should, that we're going to have to be making some tough decisions on the financing of this. And if I'm looking at the phase 1 schedule here, we actually have 2 projects going to construction in this fiscal year. That I'm looking at Merchants Way and Old Yarmouth Road.
Yes.
We have not made any funding decisions on that
Well,
yet.
Merchants Way is a grant, so that's a MassWorks grant, so that's being funded.
Being funded,
And
okay.
you did appropriate funds for the Yarmouth Road Route 28 intersection. That's where we're putting pipes in conjunction with that project, going to move from east to west and also from north to south across Route 28 to start getting into the area along Yarmouth Road, Willow Street.
Okay, so that's more the infrastructure, the initial infrastructure, not.
Not serving properties,
That's
correct?
right.
Yeah.
So the first time that comes up, is that in fiscal '21 when we're doing the Strawberry Hill Road, or? Okay. So what's your best estimate of when we need to start laying out some of these decisions in terms of how this is all going to get paid for?
Well, I think we talked about last week that occurring over the next 12 months, and I think if we can do it in that time frame, I think we'll be well suited towards implementation. But I think sooner is better than later.
Okay. And my last question is, if miracles happen and there's infrastructure money that comes from some other source than here, would we have the capacity to accelerate this phase, this project into 10 years? I mean, what's our capacity within our own town to actually make this go more quickly?
Well, the phasing is based partly on financing, but it's also based on consideration of what we can accomplish via the design work that has to be done and the construction work and the tolerance of the community, as Rob mentioned earlier, to deal with the construction work. So that's why the phasing, to try to compress it anymore, I think it's probably not workable.
Okay.
So we would apply any grants or funding to the approaches as we've presented it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, with that being said, I want to thank you, Dan and Griff and Rob, for a presentation well done, and also end by once again thanking Mark Milne and Mark Ells and the rest of the team. Also acknowledging Lindsay Council, keeping our feet to the fire through 3 bays over the years, and now Zeke Crocker with Barnstable Clean Water. These are all partners that we work closely with to make sure that ultimately the quality of water, wastewater management in the town of Barnstable is done appropriately and is done at the highest level of excellence. So with that being said, thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, now moving on to orders of the day. There is no old business this evening, but there are 3 items, 2020-038, 039, and 040, under new business. These are all resolves requiring a majority vote. I would ask Councilor Dagwan if she would read into the record item 2020-038.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. Item 2020-038, a resolve in the support of an intermunicipal agreement between Barnstable, Sandwich, and Mashpee for the purpose of the 3 bays watershed permitting. This may be acted upon and requested of a majority vote.
Is there a second? Okay. We have Mark Ells to present on this particular issue.
Good evening, Mark Ells, Town Manager. I just want to thank you all as well for your commitment and focus and leadership relevant to preparing a comprehensive water management plan. Actually on the 23rd of this month, I will have been with the town of Barnstable. I'll start my 30th year, and I was hired to do an older version of the wastewater facilities plan for the town of Barnstable. Certainly the landscape has changed dramatically, but what you've done is impressive, and it represents strong leadership for our community, and it gives us as staff guidance to be able to move forward with really difficult issues. So we appreciate that, because we couldn't do the job that was delivered tonight without your support. So thank you. And we have a lot to do still, but we greatly appreciate it. This particular resolve is not unsimilar. The next two resolves are not unsimilar to a resolve that was brought before you back in, I believe, 2017, I believe, yes. And it's an opportunity for us to move forward in discussions. This particular one is focused on the Three Bays watershed. The next one is focused on the Lewis Bay watershed. As you know, we share with our abutting communities geographic area related to the sub-watersheds that Director Santos showed you a while ago. There's different loads within those. There's potentially different approaches to address those loads, but cumulatively, if we don't come together and all address this issue, you won't get below your TMDLs. It doesn't mean that we stop and wait too long, certainly, but a coordinated effort is a logical approach. I am doing it here, and I will do it in all areas with the town council, is come before you and ask for your support in us entering into these sorts of discussions. Certainly from an authority standpoint, I need to do that, but maybe more importantly, for you to know that that's what we are doing. This takes time, it takes effort, it brings forward public issues, certainly perhaps policy issues that may come back before you or boards of selectmen in other communities. In the case of Three Bays, we are the majority in that one. In the Pompanesett Shoestring Bay, which was the last one that you provided me support through a resolve to proceed with, we were the minority there. So in this case, we want to partner with Sandwich and Mashpee. Again, this would be a 25-year agreement that we would look to forge. The watershed permits themselves are typically 20-year, renewed or reviewed on a 5-year increment. So we felt like 25 years gave us more time than the 20-year permit. We are all still either working with a CWMP or preparing our CWMP, and the hopes is that each of the three communities in this case will have theirs in place so that we can move toward further discussions regarding a watershed permit. In the case of Pompanesett Shoestring, we haven't moved to the watershed permit yet, and we need to have a collective discussion and be clear on what each of us are doing relevant to this. I think in the case of Three Bays, I'm asking through this resolve for you to support my negotiations of an intermunicipal agreement with Mashpee and Sandwich to create a similar sort of agreement. But in this case, Barnstable would be the lead in this effort. In the case of Pompanesett Shoestring, it is Mashpee. So I would ask for your support through this resolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions from the council? Councilor Schnapp?
Thank you. Mark, do you have the percentages of the contributions of each of the towns for?
No, but I
Three
can get
Bays?
those to you.
Okay.
Yeah. You have the, what do you, I don't remember off the top of my head. We have them in the reports.
It's interesting that it's changed since Cape Cod Commission did their watershed report in 2017, which at that time showed Barnstable at 93%, Sandwich at 7%, and Mashpee at less than 1%, compared to current, which is 79 Barnstable, 0.62 or less than 1% for Mashpee and Sandwich. I mean, I can even give you the square mileage, but I happen to know that. But anyway.
So Sandwich is 20% now?
Sandwich is 19.6.
19, okay, yeah.
Any other questions? Move the question. Question's been moved. Is there a second? Second? Okay, so this is, question's been moved and seconded. Item 2020-038, for resolve in support of inter-municipal agreement between Barnstable, Sandwich, and Mashpee for the purpose of three-bay watershed permitting. This is a majority vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Anyone abstaining? That is unanimous. That is a vote. Thank you. Let's move on to item number 2020-039. And Councilor Schnapp, would you read that into the record, please?
This is an item of new business, may be acted upon, majority vote. Item 2020-39, resolve in support of an intermunicipal agreement between Barnstable and Yarmouth for the purpose of Lewis Bay watershed permitting.
And Town Manager Ellis, you'll read.
I think I would be repetitive if I restated what I just did. This is moving to the east side of our community, and this is the same type of relationship, and we would use a similar IMA to forge a relationship with our easterly abutting community, Yarmouth. I mean, we've had a long-standing working relationship with Yarmouth, whether it was a regional transfer station for solid waste, certainly during our challenges with water supply, they have worked with us. And I expect that we will continue to work together on many issues. I met with the town administrator from Yarmouth on Wednesday. We did our presentation in an abbreviated version of what you saw tonight for them. We shared our financial plan, and actually their financial manager went over to meet with Director Milne, and I'm sure he'll meet with them again to better understand what we are bringing forward and we'll be discussing, certainly with Town Council. And they're very receptive to the relationship. So we hope to move forward. They are also in discussions, and I think you're aware of this, on the east side with Harwich and Dennis. And nothing we would do here would certainly erode their position or their progress there. But this is a discussion of perhaps treating wastewater from them where needed, and us being able to dispose of wastewater at available discharge. They have available discharge capacity, and one doesn't have to be related to the other necessarily. We're all looking for options. We're all looking for cost-effective options. This specific focus, though, will be on Lewis Bay because we share Lewis Bay, and we would look to put in place a relationship through an IMA, whether they treat their wastewater with the two other communities to their east or whether they work with us. Whatever the best option is for each community is what we're going to support. But a regional approach is needed. I ask for your support of this resolve so I can formally begin those discussions with Yarmouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the council? Not hearing any. Questions been moved. There a second? So we have moved the question. There is a second. Item 2020-039. This is a resolve in support of an intermunicipal agreement between Barnstable and Yarmouth for the purpose of Lewis Bay watershed permitting as written, and this is by majority vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That is a vote. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2020-040. Councilor Biedenbender, would you read that into the record, please?
Thank you, Vice President Flores. This is item number 2020-040. This is a resolve authorizing the town manager to commence negotiations with Vineyard Wind LLC regarding amendments to the host community agreement between the town of Barnstable and Vineyard Wind LLC. This may be acted upon by majority vote.
Mark, do you want to reiterate anything or share what?
I do,
focus of this
yes.
might be?
I was just looking for a date, that's all. Okay. A year ago, that's amazing that we had gone forward with the last host, signed the last host agreement. I think I had spent the better part of 2 years in the development of a host agreement with Vineyard Wind relevant to a landing of their Phase 1 project at Covell's Beach, and a second option for a Phase 2 that basically replicated the conditions of the host agreement for that future potential option. I will pause for a moment and say that there's been a lot of communication A lot meaning, mainly email communications from individuals concerned about water quality and a lack of thought relevant to water quality as we've gone forward with the host agreement by allowing Vineyard Wind to land in Barnstable and to tie into a substation. Certainly, I think if anyone has the opportunity to take the time to either ask us directly or look at the host agreement and the work our legal department and Charlie McLaughlin did specifically, both at the airport and the substation there, and then the proposed substation by Vineyard Wind, has really raised the bar as far as water quality protection. These are closed, modern systems that contemplate the risk that comes with these types of substations that weren't included in past projects. We have substations all over Cape Cod that don't do what we've achieved in Barnstable already, and that is required to be achieved if they're going to site a substation here in the future, as well as mitigating dollars through a host agreement, as well as the risk being borne by the company, meaning they weren't exempt for, if there is an error here, they're on the hook for it. So that nothing was waived here. If they make a mistake, they're paying for it and correcting it. So hopefully that's not the case, and hopefully we put in place systems, modernized systems, that avoid that. That didn't exist before this host agreement. So I've had those questions lately, and I've just found it interesting that somehow, I think I described that before, but I just wanted to share with you that that's included in the host agreement, as well as that they also pay taxes on this based on the real and personal property aspects of the value of the construction. Why I'm before you in this resolve, Vineyard Wind has come to us and asked to modify this contract to contemplate a third phase. And prior to me formally proceeding with that, I said that I've reported to you at my town manager communications that I had said to them that I was interested in having that discussion. I've also told them that I needed to come back before town council because I did not want to proceed with this unless I was supported, certainly, by our town council. What they have brought to me is certainly a replication of, at a minimum, a replication of what we've received in our Phase 1 and our Phase 2 option in the current agreement. I've shared with them that we will probably be looking at that plus. And there's been certain issues that have come up as they've moved forward with their project that we would want to make sure that they addressed so that they weren't issues for us moving forward. Like water lines during construction. I mean, we shouldn't have to debate this. They should deal with the water lines that are in the roads where they're going to construct. If they want a third option, we would probably have some fee associated with holding that or reserving that opportunity for a third phase. So it would be what we've done already plus. Saying that, if you feel as though 2 is enough, I'll stop there. If you feel as though me entertaining discussions to consider a third, I will do that as well. So I am suggesting that I should proceed with that discussion, but I would not do it until I at least receive your support to proceed with that discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the council? Not hearing any? Question's been moved, seconded. This is item number 2020-040. It's a resolve authorizing the town manager to commence negotiations with Vineyard Wind LLC regarding amendments to the host community agreement between the town of Barnstable and Vineyard Wind LLC as written. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That is unanimous. That is a vote.
Thank you. I appreciate your support, and I'll keep you briefed as I progress.
And that does end the orders of the day. Just a comment before we do bring this to closure. On the agenda, it does list that our next regular meeting will be October 17th. That is incorrect. Our next meeting will be November 7th. There will not be a meeting on October 17th. due to the fact that items from the October 3rd meeting needed 14 days for advertising to satisfy the open meeting law for the public, and there was only 13 days notification until the October 17th meeting. Hence, the items had to be carried over until November 7, 2019, which will be our next town council meeting. With that being said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you all very much.